Hey guys, in these examples, we're going to be looking at how to work problems involving the quadratic formula. This is a formula that is going to be super important from here on out. So the formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay, so the steps, of course, number one, we need to write the equation in standard form. So we want x squared followed by x, followed by the constant, and we always want it equal to 0, okay? Once we've done that, we're gonna substitute a, b, and c into the formula, and then of course, step 3 is simplify. So here's our first problem. We have x squared plus 2x minus 63. First, I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna label this, of course, as a, b, and c. Then I'm also gonna come over here and I'm gonna say a equals 1, b equals 2, and c equals negative 63. You always have to take whatever sign's in front of it, okay? Now that we know what a, b, and c are, I'm going to plug it into this formula. So I'm going to write the formula, which is negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So now I'm just going to plug it in. So we have a negative b, so negative 2 plus or minus square root of 2 squared minus 4. A is 1, c is negative 63, and over 2 times 1. Okay, so we're going to simplify that a little further. Now that's going to be negative 2 plus or minus square root. We know 2 squared is 4, minus, we're going to do 4 times 1 times negative 63. That's going to give us a negative 252 over 2 times 1, which is 2. Okay. We know that we can simplify that. Negative 2 plus or minus. We know if we minus negative, it really becomes adding. So that's going to become 4 plus 252, which is going to give us 256 over 2. So here's where we're going to have to simplify a little more. So we're going to come over here so we have a little more room. So we're going to say negative 2 plus or minus square root of 256 over 2. Well, here's where it's going to be important to remember your perfect roots. If you remember your perfect roots, you know that the square root of 256, and of course you can also try this on your calculator. So the square root of 256 is going to give us 16. So we're going to rewrite that as negative 2 plus or minus 16 over 2. And then at this point, you're going to break it into two separate equations, because if you remember, anytime you're dealing with square roots, you always have a negative and a positive answer. So we're going to say negative 2 plus 16 over 2. We're also going to say negative 2 minus 16 over 2. So negative 2 plus 16 gives you 14 over 2, which of course simplifies to 7. Then over here we have negative 2 minus 16, which is negative 18 over 2. And negative 18 divided by 2, of course, gives you 9. Negative 9, sorry. So then we have x equals 7 and negative 9. So how we'd write that is x equals, in a brace, negative 7, positive 7, negative 9, close brace. And then that is your final answer. Let's take a look at another example. We have 9x squared minus 1 equals 24. So before we can apply our quadratic formula, we're going to have to it has to be equal to 0. We need it in standard form. So we're going to start by subtracting 24 from both sides. So now we have 9x squared minus 25 equals 0. So keep in mind our formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So in this one, a is going to be 9. B, so there's not a b term because b is whatever is attached to just a single x. So we're not just going to forget about it. We're going to say b is 0 because, well, there's 0 x's. And then, of course, c is going to be negative 25. Okay. Now we're going to plug in 9, 0, and negative 25 into this formula, and we're going to get our final answer. So it's going to be negative 0 plus or minus square root of 0 squared minus 4 onto 9 times negative 25 over 2 times 9. And then of course simplifying. There's just a lot of simplifying when it comes to the quadratic formula. Negative 0 is 0, so we don't even need to write that. So we're just going to start it as plus or minus square root. Same thing here, 0 squared, useless. We don't need to write that. So I'm just going to multiply negative 4 times 9 times negative 25. It's going to give us positive 900 over 2 times 9, which is 18. Okay. I'm going to put the square root of 900 on my calculator, and we get that it's 30. So we have plus or minus 30 over 18. So I'm going to simplify that. Let's see here. We can divide both of them by 6. 30 divided by 6 is 5. 18 divided by 6 is 3. And then of course, x equals, since we used a radical, we have our plus or minus 5 thirds. So you can just keep it like this. I'll be okay if your answer's in this form, but sometimes in higher classes, your teacher might make you say x equals negative 5 thirds and positive 5 thirds. So I'll accept either of these. It means the exact same thing. Okay. Let's look at another example. We have, let's do 8x squared equals 10x. So once again, it has to be equal to 0 before we can do anything. So I'm going to start by subtracting 10x from both sides. Then we're left with 8x squared minus 10x equals 0. And that's what we're looking for, so that's good. Okay, so A is going to be 8. B is going to be negative 10. Keep in mind you have to keep whatever sign's in front of it. And since there's no constant over here, C is just going to equal 0. So we're going to take this, we're going to plug it into our formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So I know this formula looks really complicated at first, but I promise the more you do it, it's just going to become really repetitive and you'll have this memorized in no time. Okay, so now we're going to plug in 8, negative 10, and 0 into our formula. So we have a negative 10 plus or minus square root negative 10 squared. When you're plugging in these values, make sure you keep them in parentheses, okay? Because if not, it'll get you on those negatives. We have minus 4 times 8 times 0 over 2 times a, which is 8. And then, of course, we start simplifying. Now we have a negative 10, so that, of course, just becomes a positive 10. Plus or minus square root negative 10 squared. Negative 10 times negative 10 will give you positive 100 minus 4 times 8 times 0, which of course is just 0, over 2 times 8, which is 16. 10 plus or minus square root 100 minus 0 is just 100 over 16 becomes 10 plus or minus 10, because the square root of 100 is 10 over 16. Then of course we take actually we can simplify this first. We can divide all of these by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Again, 5. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Now we're going to take the positive and the negative version. We're going to say 5 plus 5 over 8. Then we're going to say 5 minus 5 over 8. So 5 plus 5 is 10 over 8. 5 minus 5 is 0 over 8. Anything divided by 0 is 0. And 10 divided by 8, we can simplify. They're each divisible by 2, becomes 5/4. So it'll be x equals 0, 5/4. The purpose of doing this example is I wanted to make sure that you know when you start to divide by 0, or if you have 0 divided by something, that it's not instantly just no solution. You can get your answer to be a 0. Let's look at another example. We're going to work 2 more examples. Once again, we need everything on the same side. We need it to be set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. Now we have negative 8x squared plus 3 equals 0. A equals negative 8. B, there's no B, so B is going to equal 0. And C is going to equal 3. We're going to plug it into our formula. x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So negative 0 plus or minus 0 squared minus 4 times negative 8 times 3. And it's going to be over 2 times a negative 8. Okay, so then of course we just start simplifying. Negative 0, actually that just goes away. We don't need a negative 0. So we just have plus or minus square root 0 squared is 0 minus 4 times a negative 8 times 3 gives you a negative 96 over 2 times negative 8 is negative 16. Now we have plus or minus square root. When you minus a negative number, of course it becomes positive, so that's like 0 plus 96, which of course is just 96 over negative 16. Okay, we can break down 96 into, I think it's 8 times 16, no. Alright, we can break down that into 6 times 16. And once again, see, I didn't know that off the top of my head, so I just started plugging in numbers to the calculator. You can do the same thing. Okay, the square root of 16 is 4, so we're going to pull a 4 out. It's going to be the square root of 6 over negative 16. So once again, the only thing that changed from here to here is that we rewrote 96 as 6 times 16, and then we took the 16 out, which of course is 4. Okay, and of course we can't forget that plus or minus in front. Now we can simplify. We can't simplify square root of 6, so that'll stay the same, but we can simplify what's in front, so 4 and 16. They're both divisible by 4, so of course that'll just become the square root of 6 over negative 4, and this will be your final answer. All right, let's look at one last example problem. So once again, we can't do anything until it's set equal to 0. So we're going to start by subtracting 4x from both sides and subtracting 5 from both sides. So now we have 5x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 0. Identify our a, b, and c. A is 5, b is negative 4, and c is 4. And now, of course, we're going to plug it into our formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So x equals negative b, which is negative negative 4, plus or minus negative 4 squared minus 4 times 5 times 4 over 2 times 5. Then of course just keep simplifying. Negative negative 4 just becomes positive 4, plus or minus negative 4 squared is positive 16 minus, we have 4 times 5 times 4, which is going to give us 80, over 2 times 5 is 10. Simplify a little more, we can do 16 minus 80, oops, which will give us negative 64 over 10. So if we remember, we cannot have a negative square root, so how we get around that is we rewrite it as 64 times a negative 1. And then of course, to get rid of that, we can take negative 1 and pull it out, making it an I. So we're going to say 4 plus or minus I square root of 64 over 10. We can simplify the square root of 64. We know the square root of 64 is 8. So now we're going to say 4 plus or minus 8i over 10. And then of course simplify. All of these we can divide by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2, 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. Okay. And there we go. Here's our final answer. You can either keep it like this, or you can break it up and say 2 plus 4i over 5, and then 2 minus 4i over 5. Okay. X equals. Either one of these will be the correct answer.